The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thick paper stock with a gold foil crest pressed into the upper left corner. Renata Voss, founder and CEO of Voss Automotive Group, regional chairwoman of the Tri-State Concourse Committee, a woman whose name appeared on 3 showroom facades within 40 miles, had not sent it herself. Her assistant had. But the handwritten note tucked inside the flap was hers, and it was brief. Appreciate the inquiry, but the Beaumont Invitational maintains curatorial standards. We can't accommodate every garage project. The note was clipped to a polite return form, the kind designed to look generous and land like a door closing. Beside the envelope on the workbench sat the car itself, the hulk of what it had once been and would be again, a 1966 Ford Galaxie 500 draped in shop rags, its flanks stripped to bare metal, its chrome long gone to oxidation and someone else's indifference. She did not know that the man who had submitted the inquiry was Daniel Marsh, and that Daniel Marsh had spent 11 years as a senior restoration specialist at Coachwork Heritage Studio in Burlingame, where he had personally overseen frame-off rebuilds of 4 vehicles now held in permanent collection at 2 separate automotive museums. She did not know his name appeared in the footnotes of 3 scholarly monographs on mid-century American coachwork, or that his hands had been inside the bodywork of cars Renata Voss had auctioned for $250,000 figures and bragged about at fundraising dinners. She had simply looked at the shop address, Marsh Auto, a single-bay rental unit on the outer edge of Caldwell's light industrial strip, and decided. Every detail of what happened next was already in place on that Tuesday morning. Stay with this one to the end. Daniel read the note once, folded it along its original crease, and set it on the corner of the bench, where he kept things that needed thinking about. The shop smelled of iron filings and old lacquer and the faint diesel drift that came through the roll-up door from the road, and he had learned to find comfort in that smell, the way other men found it in silence. He was 39. He had been running Marsh Auto for 2 years, 11 months, and 6 days, and he knew the count because Maisie had started it. His daughter kept a hand-drawn calendar on the inside of the break room door, a new crayon X each morning before school, a ritual she maintained with a dedication he had never asked for and could not bring himself to discourage. Maisie was 7. She had her mother's jaw and her mother's habit of going very still when she was thinking hard, and she carried everywhere a small brass keychain in the shape of a running horse, its patina worn smooth from handling. It had belonged to Claire. Not a sentimental piece, just a thing Claire had kept on her key ring for years because she liked the weight of it, and Maisie had claimed it in the quiet week after the funeral, with a certainty that brooked no conversation. The keychain had been laundered 40 times. The horse was nearly featureless now. She liked it that way. Claire had been gone 3 years. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, finished by the following April. The kind of speed that still struck Daniel was an abstraction, a timeline too compressed to be real. She had been 36. A landscape architect who drew with mechanical pencils and argued gently and persistently that Daniel was wasting himself at Coachwork Heritage when he could be doing the same work for himself. He had never quite believed her. Then she was gone, and the belief no longer mattered. Only the calculus did. Maisie needed a parent who came home. He had left Coachwork Heritage on a Thursday, signed the lease on the Caldwell Bay that same weekend. The Galaxy had come through a salvage contact, a man named Pete Okafor, who ran a towing and recovery operation out of a yard on Route 9, and who understood after 2 years of proximity to Daniel's work that certain cars deserved better than the Crusher. Pete had called on a Wednesday evening and described the Galaxy in the flat shorthand of someone cataloging damage, and Daniel had driven out that night. He pulled the tarp back and the cold air came off the metal in a way he recognized, the particular coolness of untouched steel, rust, and old rubber, and something faintly sweet beneath it all, like the ghost of wax someone had applied 30 years ago. The car was a wreck. Most people would have agreed with Renata Voss without being asked. Daniel bought it for $1,100 and towed it back that night. He did not begin immediately. He had 2 other jobs in progress, and he worked through those first, unhurried. Maisie came by after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, doing homework at the small desk he had built into the corner of the break room, emerging occasionally to watch him work with the focused observation of someone taking inventory. She had learned his rhythms. It was on the 3rd Thursday, while Maisie sat on a stool eating an apple and watching him assess the Galaxy's driver's side rocker panel, that she said, without preamble, "It looks sad?" He told her it wasn't sad. It was just waiting. She turned the brass horse over in her fingers. "Like a seed," she said. He didn't answer. But he wrote the word in his shop notebook that night, in the margin next to the Galaxy's VIN, because sometimes the right frame for the came from the least expected direction. The Beaumont Invitational was Renata Voss's annual showcase, held each June on the grounds of a converted 19th century manor house she had purchased and remade into an event venue. The show drew collectors, mark historians, and a specific tier of wealthy enthusiasts who measured automotive beauty through the lens of auction result and provenance paper. Renata controlled every aspect of the curation personally. She had turned away cars with cleaner histories than Daniel's Galaxy for reasons she did not explain in writing. When the rejection note arrived, Pete Okafor was in the bay dropping off a parts order and read the handwritten line over Daniel's shoulder. "She seriously called it a garage project," Pete said. Daniel set the note on the corner of the bench. "She hasn't seen it yet," he said. That was the entirety of his response. He did not know then that he would see Renata Voss in person 3 weeks later, and that the exchange would be worse than the note. The occasion was a Saturday swap meet at the Caldwell Fairgrounds, the kind of regional gathering where serious builders and weekend enthusiasts mixed without ceremony. Daniel was there sourcing trim pieces. Renata circulated these events occasionally, her assistant said, to scout emerging builds, though the people who attended understood she was maintaining visibility in a world she preferred to control. She stopped at Daniel's table, picked up a disassembled door handle assembly from a 1964 Galaxy, and studied a progress photograph he had pinned to the table's backboard. The car stripped and braced, taken on day 12 of work. "Ambitious for a one-man shop," she said. Her assistant, a young woman named Cleo, stood 2 steps behind with a catalog. "These restorations take proper resources," Renata added. "Workshop, team, equipment." She set the door handle down and moved on. Cleo paused a half step longer than her employer, long enough for her eyes to move from the photograph to Daniel's face to the photograph again. Then she followed. Daniel watched them go and said nothing. He turned back to the table and repacked what he hadn't sold, working quietly until the morning was over. He had heard that register before. The particular flatness of someone performing expertise they did not fully possess, the assessment made before the assessment began. He had learned over 11 years at Coachwork Heritage and nearly 3 in Caldwell that the work was not for the people who assessed it. The work was for the car. He drove back to the bay and began day 22. The work on the Galaxy proceeded across 61 days from first strip to final clear coat, and Daniel logged every one in the shop notebook with the same flat discipline he brought to all of it. Day 1, full strip, VIN documented, Russ mapping. Day 8, frame media blasted. 2 stress cracks discovered and marked for repair. Day 15, Pete delivered the replacement quarter panel section, sourced from a Georgia salvage yard, pressed steel, correct year, no filler. Day 22, bodywork, begun on the driver's side, the kind of patient metal finishing that required a man to press his palm flat against the surface and read it by feel, not looking for what was there, but for what was not yet right. Day 29, Pete's nephew, a young man named Drius, who had apprenticed briefly at a body shop before a layoff, brought him to Pete's yard, began coming by 2 afternoons a week to assist. He was not trained to Daniel's standard. He was trainable, which was different and sufficient. Daniel did not narrate his methods to Darius in the manner of someone performing instruction. He simply worked, and Darius watched, and when Darius made an error, rushing a weld, applying filler where metalwork was still possible, Daniel would stop, remove it, and do it again at the same pace. Darius asked him once on day 34 why he bothered with the correct method when the shortcut would be invisible under paint. Daniel kept his eyes on the panel and said, "It wouldn't be invisible to me." Darius didn't ask again. On day 38, Maisie came in after school and found Daniel fitting a repaired section of rocker panel, the metal warm from finishing, the surface smooth in a way that had cost 4 days of incremental work. She put her hand flat against it, the brass horse in her other fist. "It doesn't feel sad anymore," she said. Daniel told her it had been waiting for the right attention. "Like people," she said. He agreed that it was like people. He did not tell her that he had been thinking about Claire during much of the body work, not with grief exactly, but with the specific recall of someone who had learned something important too late to say thank you for it. Claire had told him once that the best work she did was the work that restored what had already existed. He had nodded without fully understanding. He understood now. Day 47. Engine out. The original 390 FE block. Present and intact. Worn but not damaged. The kind of original numbers find that changed a car's value in ways Renata Voss understood very well, even if she had not looked closely enough to know it was there. Day 52. Engine rebuild begun. Darius learning the assembly sequence without improvising. Day 58. Paint prep. The car primed in a silver gray that showed every imperfection and forgave none. And Daniel spent 2 full afternoons on his knees under shop lights, reading the surfaces with his hands. Day 60. Base coat. The Galaxy's original candy apple red, mixed from a documented factory formula by a coatings specialist Daniel had worked with at Coachwork Heritage and called as a favor. Day 61, final clear. 2 coats. The kind of depth that had to be earned by what was underneath it. The car sat covered for 24 hours while the clear cured. Darius looked at it twice, and Parkwell's Times stood with his arms at his sides and his face doing something he didn't have language for yet. On day 62, Daniel pulled the cover off. Pete was there, and Darius and Maisie, who had a half day from school and had arrived at noon with her backpack and the brass horse already in her hand. The car was what it had been, and more. Every inch had been reconsidered and reformed, from inside the metal out, the body lines as clean as the factory had intended, the interior retrimmed in the original parchment vinyl that Darius had tracked down through a supplier in Tennessee after 2 weeks of calls. The 390 idled when Pete turned the key with a note that belonged to nothing manufactured after 1970. A deep mechanical authority that had no interest in performance and every interest in permanence. Pete said, "Daniel," that was all. Maisie put the brass horse against the door panel for a moment, a gesture with no name, and tucked it back in her pocket. The Beaumont Invitational that June did not include the Galaxy. What happened instead was that a regional editor for Motorwork Quarterly, a publication with 40 years of print history, attended a smaller show in Whitfield the same weekend, a show Daniel had entered through Pete's quiet recommendation. The editor's name was Franklin Ost, a man who had been writing about American iron since before Renata Voss had learned to spell concours. And when Franklin Ost stopped at the Galaxy, he stopped the way people stop when something earns it rather than demands it. He walked the car 3 times. He knelt beside the rocker panels. He asked who had done the metal work. Daniel said he had. Franklin opened his notebook. The piece ran in Motorwork Quarterly's August issue. 4 pages with photographs under the headline, The Caldwell Build. Franklin wrote that the Galaxy represented a technical benchmark for full numbers matching rebuilds of its era, and that the metal finishing was, quote, the kind of work you encounter perhaps 3 times in a decade if you're paying attention. He noted the original 390 block, the factory formula paint, and, in the final paragraph, the shop address. Renata Voss received her copy on a Thursday. She read the piece in her office, and her assistant Cleo, passing the open door with a file, saw her employer go still in a way she had not seen before. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of recalibration, of someone quietly rearranging what they thought they knew. Cleo had already read the article. She had spent 40 minutes that morning thinking about the swap meet, about the photograph on the table's backboard, about the expression on Daniel Marsh's face when Renata had spoken about proper resources. She understood now what she had not understood then. The man at that table had not been a hopeful amateur seeking validation. He had been someone who had already done the work and simply had not yet shown it to anyone paying attention. Renata called the Motorwork Quarterly editorial office that afternoon, a fact Franklin Ost mentioned in a brief industry note the following month. She also called the Whitfield show organizer, who confirmed that the Galaxy had taken Best in Show in its class. 3 independent judges had assessed it, including a marquee historian from the Northeast Automotive Preservation Society, whose written evaluation used the phrase museum quality standard in its second line. Renata arrived at Marsh Auto on a Tuesday, the same day of the week as the rejection note, though Daniel did not register that symmetry until later. She came alone without Cleo. She stood in the bay doorway for a moment before speaking, the kind of pause that belongs to someone who has rehearsed something and is deciding whether to use the rehearsed version. I may have been hasty, she said, with the invitational. I didn't have a full picture of your background. She glanced at the Galaxy covered near the roll-up door. If you'd consider exhibiting next June, I think there's a place for this car at Beaumont. Her voice was not the voice she had used at the swap meet. The register had changed. Something had been removed from it, something that had kept it at a fixed distance from the person it was addressing. Daniel wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked at her without urgency. I'll think about it, he said. He offered nothing that required a follow-up. She nodded, looked at the covered car once more, and left. Darius had heard everything from the back of the bay. He came out after the sound of her car faded, holding a box of gasket material. That's it? He said. Daniel was already back at the bench, working on a brake job. That's it, he said. The Galaxy went to the Whitfield show again the following October, where a buyer named Richard Thorne, a Motorwork Quarterly subscriber for 22 years, who had driven 4 hours on a Saturday specifically to see the car Franklin Ost had described, walked it for 30 minutes in near total silence, and then offered Daniel a figure that had not been in any conversation Daniel had anticipated. Daniel thanked him and said he would consider it. He drove home, made dinner, helped Maisie with a math worksheet, and sit for a while after she went to bed with the brass horse she had left on the table, turning it over in his palm. He did not know that night what he would decide. He knew the car was finished. He knew the work had been the point. He knew Claire had been right about all of it. And he was thinking about how to tell Maisie that, and whether Seven was old enough to understand that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is give something broken back the form it was always supposed to have. Outside, the September air had turned sharp at the edge of fall. The bay was locked. The galaxy was under its cover. And in the morning, the crayon X would go on the calendar, still going, still counting. He let the offer sit on the corner of his thinking, the way the rejection note had sat on the corner of the bench, and he went about the following weeks with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything that mattered. On a Thursday evening in late October, the kitchen warm with the smell of pasta, Maisie was working on a drawing of a running horse, all four hooves clear of the ground. She asked, without looking up, whether Daniel was going to sell the red car. He told her someone had offered. She kept drawing. "Did you finish it?" she said. He told her yes, it was finished. She looked up, then her mother's jaw set in her mother's way. "Then maybe it's ready to go somewhere," she said, and looked back at the drawing, like a seed. He sold to the car to Richard Thorne the following week at the figure Thorne had named, unrevised. The paperwork included, at Thorne's request, a full copy of Daniel's shop notebook. All 61 days, every part number, every repair note, which Thorne said he intended to keep with the car as part of its provenance record. Daniel made a copy for himself before handing it over, not from attachment to the object, but because it seemed like the kind of record Maisie might want someday, when she was old enough to understand all the parts of what those days had meant. Renata Voss learned the sale figure through Graham Seeley, a collector in her orbit, who had heard it from Thorne directly and reported it at a dinner with the casual specificity of someone who knew exactly what the number would mean to the person he was telling. The figure was not extraordinary by the standards of the show cars Renata curated. What it was precise. It was the number that corresponded without ambiguity to museum quality standard. It made the phrase in Franklin Aust's article something other than a compliment. It made it an appraisal. Renata sent a letter the following week, not through her assistant. Her own handwriting on the same heavy paper stock as the first note, the same gold foil crest in the upper corner. She wrote that she had given the Beaumont Invitational's June roster further consideration and hoped Daniel would accept an invitation to exhibit, that she believed the show would benefit from his work, and that she wanted to be direct. She had not made a fully informed assessment when she reviewed his original inquiry, and she regretted that. It was the longest sentence in the note, written without revision, which was visible in the ink. Daniel read it once. He folded it along its original crease and set it on the corner of the bench. He was already into a new job, a carburetor and cooling system overhaul on a customer's daily driver, the kind of work that required nothing remarkable and everything careful. And he worked through it with Darius beside him, the bay quiet except for tools, and the occasional sound of Pete's wrecker on the road outside. Darius was asking the right questions now, making fewer errors, beginning to develop the quality that could not be taught directly but only caught by proximity from someone who already had it. The kind of attention that did not fluctuate with the value of the object. He would answer Renata's letter eventually. He had not decided yet whether the answer would be yes. He drove home that evening as the last light went flat above the industrial strip, the shop locked. Nothing left undone. The kitchen light was on when he turned into the street. Maisie was asleep, her homework stacked neatly on the table, the brass horse on top of the pile where she always left it when she wasn't holding it. He stood in the kitchen in the quiet of the house and looked at the small, worn shape of it, the horse nearly featureless now, its form held by memory rather than surface. He turned off the light above the table and left the one above the stove. The calendar on the break room door had another X in it. It always did. The work continued, quiet, unhurried, earned.